In Texas, political maps are once again at the center of controversy. Late last month, Governor Greg Abbott signed a new congressional map into law which will be used to elect members to the U.S. House of Representatives. Civil rights groups are arguing that the new map gives Republicans an unfair partisan advantage in the upcoming midterm elections and dilutes the voting power of certain communities. What Texas is being accused of is called gerrymandering, and if successful, this precedent could change elections forever.
Gerrymandering is when politicians manipulate voting district lines for their ability to entrench their power. And it often distorts election results and weakens accountability, and often silences the voices of communities, particularly communities of color, young voters, working families.
That's Omar Noraldine, Senior Vice President of Policy and Litigation for the grassroots organization Common Cause. He explains how there can be different drivers behind gerrymandering.
It could be partisan gerrymandering, which means the lines are drawn to entrench the power and ensure that candidates from, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party are elected. But also there's racial gerrymandering, which is used to make sure that the voting power of, for example, Black communities isn't harnessed through their voting, and the lines are drawn in a way that splits up communities based on their racial identity.
In this recent case in Texas, Noraldine says politicians are engaging in partisan gerrymandering since the updated voting districts are expected to add 5 additional Republican seats in the U.S. House. Another red flag is that the state is redrawing its voting map in the middle of the decade instead of waiting until after the census.
What the census is a counting of the number of people that, live in the United States, and that's done every 10 years. People move from state to state, people move from city to city, and to ensure that our congressional districts, so these are the voting districts that elect members of Congress, are proportional to each other, have roughly the same amount of people, that the district lines within a state are drawn in a way that accounts for the voting power of communities of interest. So people that live together, work together, view themselves as a cohesive community, that those communities, as people move, are kind of held together within single districts. And that happens every 10 years.
He adds that what Republican leaders in Texas are doing isn't illegal or unlawful. However, mid-decade redistricting is not standard practice and ignores crucial census data. President Donald Trump has publicly supported the updated map, reinforcing the idea that redistricting serves Republican interests. After this, Democratic California Governor Gavin Newsom publicly floated a counterattack, suggesting his state redraw its maps to add 5 more Democratic House seats.
He and others, state leaders in the state, clarified that what they're doing is in response to Texas, and not just because Texas is doing it for Republicans and California is going to do it for Democrats, but what they're trying to achieve is national balance in the congressional maps. So to speak, in their words, to neutralize what Texas is doing so that President Trump doesn't have a Congress that is unaccountable.
Bruce Spiva is a senior vice president at the Campaign Legal Center, a nonprofit, nonpartisan group focused on voting rights. He explains the difference in how California is redistricting compared to Texas.
They have enacted a law that they said would be temporary through 2030, and that would only go into effect if Texas actually goes through with this plan. It would redistrict in California in a way that created 5 new Democratic districts. At least that's the intention. But unlike Texas, they're going to put that before the people of California, who will get a chance to vote on whether that goes into effect or not.
In addition to Texas, states like New York, Illinois, and Maryland are also considering similar plans. However, some states have provisions in their constitutions that make mid-decade redistricting much more difficult. Currently, there's no sweeping federal law limiting gerrymandering.
So, for example, in Florida actually bans partisan gerrymandering as part of the Florida Constitution. So the way in which district lines are drawn in many states is by the state legislature. And so the state can pass laws to govern how the state legislature should do this. The other kind of check on this power is what's called independent redistricting. And there are different ways to conduct independent redistricting. One way is through independent redistricting commissions or citizen-led redistricting commissions. And so here it would be people who apply to be part of these redistricting commissions that actually draw the district lines rather than politicians.
There are plenty of ways to draw district maps unfairly, but what does it take to draw them in a way that accurately represents the political voice of communities? Map making is a complex science, but Spiva says there are some ways to tell whether a district has been gerrymandered or not.
If you have a state that's split 50-50 among, say, Democrats and Republicans, generally, half of the seats ought to go to Republicans and half ought to go to Democrats. It's not going to be perfect. You have wave elections and sometimes it's candidate quality or whatever. But, over time, roughly, you would expect it to be about like that. And often what we've seen with partisan gerrymandering is you have a 50-50 state, take like Wisconsin, where the Republicans who did the partisan gerrymandering there control an overwhelming majority of the delegation, way more than 50%. Also, there are traditional redistricting criteria, such as compactness, so the district doesn't spread out all over the state. And it's not a constitutional principle, but it's something that is considered a standard, that districts be contiguous, that you don't put one part of the district here and then skip over a big geographic area and put another part over here.
In the case of Texas, this sudden off-cycle gerrymandering has given Republicans an advantage heading into next year's midterms, which traditionally are more challenging for a sitting president and their corresponding political party. Lawsuits have been filed in an attempt to block the updated map from taking effect, but if it passes, Spiva believes it will set a dangerous new precedent that undercuts voting rights and democracy.
The implications are that the people's voice is really taken away, right? Because essentially politicians are choosing their voters and can keep themselves in office, even if there was a groundswell among people in their former districts to get rid of them. I think immediate implications is it also, and this is the intention, it insulates the president from the typical Democratic, again, small d, Democratic check that the midterm elections pose for all presidents of all parties, right? It's almost always the case in a president's first term, or in this case, the second term, but not back to back with his first term. The president in power loses seats in Congress, almost always the case. It happened with Barack Obama. It happened with George W. Bush. It happened with Bill Clinton. And so what we need in this country is we need national legislation.
To find out more about Omar Nooraldeen, Bruce Spiva, and all our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, follow us at Viewpoints Radio on X, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galante. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.